All of that implies a brokenness, that it's not functioning properly. But all disease, right, for lack of better terms, all healing, it is the body healing itself. Every symptom is the body achieving some sort of balance and homeostasis. Chronic is like having a big, pond with a dam, and it's just slowly trickling out of your body. And then acute is like after a storm, you go down to the river or waterfall, and it's just like pouring like crazy. But acute storms never last, right? Unless we suppress it, and then we build a dam and it starts to accumulate because of lack of faith in our body.
The fact that you have an industry that's intentionally propagandizing you with fear about what? About God's creation, about nature? That propagandizing could very well be the trigger for the manifestation of disease. They're going to sit waiting until you get sick and say, oh, look, by the way, I have a solution to this thing that you just developed that I told you were going to get, and somehow you magically got it. A lot of people are sick in ways that even the modern framework doesn't even recognize them as being sick, because as long as you hit the right points on those tests, you're healthy, even if you don't feel healthy.
Isolation is not a concept that exists in nature. Isolating something out from a plant or a food, the whole is always greater than the parts, and that's why I argue against synthetic vitamins. And it's about allowing health to manifest rather than trying to force it. And when we're in the isolated chemical world and in the suppression world, we're trying to force health.
And I have friends that reach out to me as well, colleagues, doctors who adopted this one size fits all approach, like I'm going to go on this diet, and then the season changes and they're like, oh, I don't feel very well. Well, yeah, you can't just have the same diet all year. That doesn't make any sense.
Testing goes both ways, right? Because I just recently had a client, and they had such high faith in their body until they started testing. And it was after the testing that all of the sort of symptoms started. They were falsely diagnosed with like thyroid issues. And then you look at the clinical profile and it doesn't really match.
Joining me today is Liev Dalton, otherwise known as BeyondTerrain on Instagram and YouTube, who got my attention when I saw a reel of him discussing what he believed to be fundamentally the root of disease is distance from creation and the creator, which really spoke to me because many years ago I wrote an article about what I believe to be the toxin environmental related hypothesis of disease, and I think he put it a lot more succinctly than I did, which is creation and, relatedly, the creator. So, Liev, welcome. Thank you for doing this. And
thank you.
Maybe you can start by addressing that assertion, because it's an interesting one.
It is, and it is one that I feel strongly about as very foundational. Before I really solidifying my understanding in that perspective, I used to say that all disease was toxicity and deficiency. Right? And this is summed up essentially as excess or lack thereof. Right? So anything out of balance. I think that still holds true as, subcategories of distance from the creator and thus creation, because as we stray from nature, as we stray from how we're meant to live and what we're meant to live for and what our purpose and meaning are and our connection and source, we end up engaging in deficiency and excess. So I really like it as a starting point, as a really axiomatic way of looking at it as well. And it gets a lot more concrete when we start looking at our lives as requiring balance, as homeostasis. And I really do love your introduction, because it highlights that our attuning to our own individuality on this journey is fundamentally the most important thing that we can do. And so with a general statement like distance from creator and creation, it allows that space for how does this relate to our individual bodies, our journeys, where we're at, what our North Star is, where we're going. Like, these are the big questions we want to ask ourselves and figure out, right? Like, what does our body need right now? Like, there's a time and a place for different interventions and protocols and supplements and all of that, even maybe pharmaceutical. I'm not against anything like that. There's a time and a place. There's seasons to our lives as well, right? So again, when we start living in accordance with the season, right, we're getting back to what creation truly entails, right? So there's seasons to being pure in the food that we consume or the intervention that we may do or a protocol that we may do. And there's also a season for taking a step back from all of that and just being here now in the moment and focusing on something greater and bigger and more meaningful, right? So there's time and a place, right? And that's the attunement piece that I like to focus in on too. And this statement allows for that.
Yeah. Yeah. You see, I'm glad there's a lot of interesting things that you brought up that really like mirror my journey through this understanding as well. I also started at it from, because like the most common illnesses that people have, or the most common causes of illness that people have today, are fundamentally related to something they're not getting or something they're getting too much of. And the question of what they're not getting, well, you could tie that back into nature and creation. But then the thing that they're getting too much of, or any at all, that might be harmful in any small substance or in any small quantity, are essentially artificial, or the thesis of my article was refinement is at the source of a lot of the illness that people experience today. And that refinement, you can conceptualize that as making oils or fats out of industrial, substrates and processes and refining it into something that can be used for consumption. Refining in the pharmaceutical sense, you can take something like the bark of a willow tree and decide that the most important thing in that people have been using for millennia is the salicylic acid that's in it, and then make aspirin, and that's just salicylic acid. Whereas in reality, in the willow bark, it's about 4% the constituent. So how do you know the other stuff in there isn't doing anything in addition to the salicin that's in the willow bark? Or you can think of it as artificial lighting. You think of light as just the thing that illuminates so you can see, and so you make LED devices or LED bulbs that require low, wattage, and all it does is illuminate stuff, but it doesn't provide any of the other benefits of light as such that comes from the sun or from a flame. So like the refinement is the process that leads to the toxins in the environment that then interact with our body and cause our body to unravel because it's encountering something unnatural, whether in style or in quantity. And then what led after that was thinking about that only accounts for this, because there's people who eliminate those things from their lives, but they're still unhealthy. And so that led me to the next thing, which was kind of what you alluded to, which is first you have to understand the person, because people aren't the same. Just like people have different personalities from a psychological framework, you can think of it as their physiology has a different personality. And this has been known for thousands of years. It typically was called, temperament or constitutional medicine or whatever. The Galenic tradition, the Ayurvedic tradition, the Chinese medicine, they all refer to the same stuff. And so you have to understand what makes a person that person, not just their personality, their psyche, their preferences, because all of that stuff is nested into the same. And this is where I've landed now, and you tell me what you think about this, is the physiology, the anatomy, the personality, the psyche, vocational, what they get meaning out of, that is all comes in the package of the spirit that animates them, so to speak. Like, there's a higher spirit that captures our being, and that spirit has a way of existing in the world. And these are archetypes that people talk about forever, but each archetype has a personality, each archetype has every dimension that you exist in has a preference, and so you have to know the person before you can even help them optimize their health. Sure, you can eliminate toxins and give them the thing that they don't have, but are you optimizing their health for them? That's where I've gotten to with that.
Absolutely. Yeah, just to comment on the toxicity standpoint, because I love this statement, distance from creation, right, from nature. Isolation is not a concept that exists in nature. So even the concept of isolating something out from a plant or a food and taking it, right, the whole is always greater than the parts. And that's why I argue against synthetic vitamins and isolated chemicals as not being a part of true natural healing, right? Which feeds into this other concept too of know thyself, that old maxim, right? And what the role of the practitioner truly is most people now forget that within the natural healing paradigm, the concept of docere, right? Doctor as teacher. And what needs to be taught is not necessarily more information, right? Or more intellectualization, but more clarity, right? Deeper understanding, wisdom, and we kind of get these things confused that if we understand the biochemistry of the body, we then understand ourselves on a deeper level. But I'm more concerned with the belief system, right?
Yeah.
Whether you view your body as broken or not. Like, our bodies do understand this. And we can look at Masaru Emoto or Veda Austin to see how this might manifest as a potential mechanism, but our intention shapes how the structure of water. Right? Like, when you can place intention and freeze the water, you can see certain structures. You can write something on a piece of paper. If the listeners you aren't familiar, Veda Austin and Masaru Emoto, right? They study with water and how intention can shape it, right? And it's well worth your time to look into it. And our bodies are water, right? Like, the waters of the body understand our intention, our belief, right? And Bruce Lipton wrote The Biology of Belief, and all of these things do shape us. So understanding ourselves fundamentally is one of the most important things we can do to understand our constitution. There are certain fields that are very interesting. Like, I've studied iridology, right? The study of the iris as being a way to determine, one's constitution. Maybe some schools argue it's more physical. My mentors are great and bridge the sort of spiritual and the physical while looking in the iris. And there is an interplay between the two. So I'm throwing a lot of names out, and I realize that. But like the Bigelsons, right? And even Harvey Bigelson did a lot of work in the dark field microscopy world. And in his work, he, through dark field microscopy, looking at blood in the live state, not to be confused with live blood analysis, which is often a problematic field, but this dark field microscopy, you were allowed to see these holograms in the blood. Right, and you could see areas of stagnation, right? And there would be an interplay between the physical accumulation of toxicity around the energetical stagnations in our body, right? So all of our bodies express differently. I know people who have, their left pinky toe as an area of stagnation in their body. What that means, we could spend all day trying to intellectualize it, but when their body is in stress, for lack of better terms, or they're overwhelmed in some capacity, whether it be physical or metaphysical, that pinky toe flares up, right? Yeah. What's the rhyme and reason? Only God knows, and we can try to figure these things out. And I think we can get to some sort of understanding in making sense of it. This is the understanding aspect and true wisdom of the body, right? Because when we understand, again, natural healing and how the body heals itself, that area of maybe detoxification or fluidity or movement of illness out of the body, when we suppress it with the antifungals or whatever kind of steroid cream you want to put on it, it doesn't actually get rid of that disease or area of stagnation. Oftentimes it come back like worse off, or it moves around, and this is translocation of disease that just moves disease about the body, and it doesn't actually help with transformation of disease. We're not actually transmuting disease in our body, and that's the goal with natural healing, is like, let's find, and I'm careful with my words, but find the health that is innate and intrinsic to the human existence with you. Right? It's about allowing health to manifest rather than trying to force it. And when we're in the isolated chemical world and in the suppression world, we're trying to force health. And it's almost an impossibility to truly allow health to manifest, right? Whatever health means, energy, vitality, whatever it is. So I'll throw it back to you.
No, that's there's a lot of good points there, but fundamentally, this is like you're saying about trying to help people understand or correct or guide or whatever, advise their beliefs. That's the situation I've come to. Like, there's a lot of enticing directions to take your career as a healthcare provider, professional, whatever. But in my opinion, the most empowering, and that's really like what I see myself as trying to do, is empower people with wisdom and guidance. I'm not the source of healing. I don't have the answer to everyone's problems. I don't know everything, and I'm not gonna, stand here and say that this one thing is the thing that's gonna fix everyone's problems, because that would be disingenuous and dishonest and wrong. So I think the highest, lever for trying to improve the health of as many people as possible. I mean, and let's face it, a lot of people are sick in ways that even the modern framework doesn't even recognize them as being sick, because the human has been abstracted out with metrics, labs, imaging, whatever, survey, inventories, and as long as you hit the right points on those tests, you're healthy, even if you don't feel healthy, even if you don't seem to have purpose in your life, vocational meaninglessness, relational turmoil, psychological distress, even something as small as like, oh man, when the season changes, I don't feel very well, and I'm not sure why that happens. And I have friends that reach out to me as well, colleagues, doctors who adopted this one size fits all approach. Like, I'm going to go on this diet, and then the season changes and they're like, oh, I don't feel very well. I'm like, well, yeah, you can't just have the same diet all year. That doesn't make any sense. Like, you're not the same in spring as you were in the fall. The food is not the same. The climate is not the same. Like, to think that you can just have a one size. So anyway, I'm digressing a little bit, but the belief, the framework, the mindset around health, I think, is where we need to really like hone in on. And to be honest with you, that's the one that I feel like with the time in the age of social media, which in my eyes, the internet and social media have created a platform for resonance that's never existed before. Like, humans, whether or not they can intellectually understand what you're saying when you say disease is caused by distance from creation and creator, it doesn't matter. It resonates with them, and they click and they get interested and they want to learn more what that means.
Yeah, and testing goes both ways, right? Because I just recently had a client and we were discussing how, like, that kind of timeline, and they had such high faith in their body until they started testing.
Mm-hmm.
And it was after the testing that all of the sort of symptoms started, right? And they were falsely diagnosed with like thyroid issues.
Oh, no
right?
way.
Like
okay.
TSH
Yeah.
T3, T4 where it's slightly off. And then you look at the clinical profile and it doesn't really match. But psychosomatically, the symptoms started to show up after the test results, not prior to. And this was just like routine, like blood work in a way, just to see if everything's okay, right? So like, it kind of goes both ways. And here's the thing, like belief, and because belief is just faith in something, and so I discuss faith a lot. Lack of belief in our body, and how our bodies operate is a massive source of stagnation energetically in the body. And thus, where the accumulation occurs around the stagnation, maybe that's where the toxicity builds up. That's where you think of like a log in the river, all the debris is accumulating behind this log that fell in the river. You think of the log as sort of this energetic stagnation in a way. But this disbelief in the body, right, or viewing the body as broken, even the word dis-ease, dysregulation, all of these imply that the body is broken. Right? Dis, the prefix, or mal, all of that implies a brokenness that's not functioning properly. But all disease, right, for lack of better terms, all healing, it is the body healing itself. Every symptom is the body achieving some sort of balance and homeostasis. Yep. It might be a little uncomfortable. And, we could dive into the differences between something that's acute versus chronic, because these manifest differently, right? Chronic is like having a big, pond with a dam, and it's just slowly trickling out of your body. And then acute is like after a storm, you go down to the river or waterfall, and it's just like pouring like crazy. But acute storms never last, right? Unless we suppress it, and then we build a dam, and it starts to accumulate, right? Like that's where we kind of get in our way and create problems, largely, again, because of lack of faith in our body, right? Like if we don't do something about these little acute illnesses, we're going to have worse problems. And so I like to tell this story of my daughter. She's 8 months now, and when she was like a month old, she had this eye goop, like eye discharge coming out of her eyes. And, my wife and I, we have such high faith in our bodies, and especially our daughter and her ability, and there's a time and place for everything, right? So not medical advice, but but the eye discharge lasted for about a month, right? It did. It was on and off, and for a week it was gone, and then it came back. And if you go online and you look, eye discharge in newborns, it could be conjunctivitis, it could be pink eye, it could lead to a bacterial infection, it could lead to blindness, you could lose the eye, right? Neurological issues. Yeah. And it's kind of the fear, right? And faith is the antidote to fear. Yes. But the fear would lead you to the antibiotic eye cream. Yeah. And that's the first layer of suppression that we encountered. It comes so early on. Same, a little bit of gas, a little bit of reflux in babies, and proton pump inhibitors, right? So we kind of get in our own way very, very early on in this kind of modern world. Every time we have these acute storms, we suppress, and then wonder why we get the allergies and the eczema and the this and the that kind of developing, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, and then it worsens over time. Like, we can start to see how the chronic state develops through the stagnation, and ultimately it is lack of faith in our bodies.
Yeah.
Right? Now, again, always time and a place, right? We do live in a modern world, right? But approaching medicine in all natural or otherwise with faith is the ultimate way to get the most out of anything that you do.
Yeah.
Right? So,
and like what you're saying, it's like, it's a layer of suppression or activation, the psychological, the fear. You familiar with the nocebo effect, the placebo effect? You introduce something and someone has some effect, whether positive or negative, or you don't introduce anything, you just tell them that they're going to have it, and then they get full-blown disease, even though you didn't give them anything. So obviously, the human being exists in multiple dimensions. And so if psychology, let's say, and I don't want to use psychology because it almost seems like clinical mood disorder. Let's say the power of your mind, of your consciousness, right? It can manifest so much so that the fact that you have an industry, I'm not going to say like just medicine because there's a lot of industries that do this. The fact that you have an industry that's intentionally propagandizing you with fear about what? About God's creation, about nature, but to trust them. But that propagandizing, that could very well be the trigger for the manifestation of disease. And then they're going to sit waiting until you get sick and say, oh, look, by the way, I have a solution to this thing that you just developed that I told you were going to get, and somehow you magically got it. And now I have a solution to the thing that I said you were going to get. So come to me, don't worry, just come over here and we're going to fix you. But what that should tell people, but because enough people don't talk about this, is that it's all connected. Health now, in my mind, vitality, good health, whatever, is coherence between the different dimensions that you exist in. And most importantly, all those dimensions being in harmony with the spirit that animates you, because those dimensions that you exist on, if they're not functioning like in harmony with one another, disease can manifest. But also, even if the whole thing is in harmony, but it's in disharmony with your spirit, then that can also lead to disease, despair, meaninglessness in your life, trouble with your relationships, and ultimately disease. So health is harmony, it's coherence, it's reintegration of all the dimensions that you exist on with the thing that gives you your being. Like the Arabs call it ruh, the Islamic medicine calls it ruh, the Western medicine calls it soul, Eastern medicine calls it, I don't know, actually, I'm not really familiar with the language, but I'm sure they have a word for it. Everyone has a word for it because they know, and we know too. You can keep someone alive on a machine, but there's nothing there. And alternatively, if there's a spirit that drives a person to live, they will survive the most catastrophic circumstances that from a medical perspective we think, oh yeah, this person's done. And I've seen it myself, in the hospital all the time. Like, how did this person survive? What they call in, I think the Sufis call permission to life. Like, you've been given permission to live. And so there's nothing that's going to take that away from you unless someone comes and like chops your head off or something. On the flip side, if you don't have the permission to live and there's nothing any doctor can do to keep you alive, you're dead. It's over. So the interconnectedness of all of this stuff, I think, is probably, and it's hard to get it across because it comes across as woo-woo, but you just have to point to a nocebo study. And is this woo-woo? You don't have an explanation for it. That doesn't mean it's not real.
Yeah, and I think we're kind of hitting the nail on the head with where the true healing occurs, right? Like we hear all these stories of miracles, and I don't think that miracles are unique to any specific unique individual or special people or, certain. We can all access it. And it's through choosing faith in every moment, right? Like these little micro moments throughout the day, choosing faith and love is the answer to creating these miracles and spontaneous remission in our lives, right? Because like the point of faith as being a very center point in my focus in every moment of my day when we couple faith with pain, pain ceases to be suffering. It becomes information, right? It becomes direction, right? With faith, all of the suffering disappears, right? All of the hardship that we go through, again, just fuels the best version of ourselves, right? And so the hardship that we have endured, to view it as hardship disallows our own transmutation, right? When we think of, again, kind of real woo-woo concept, turning lead into gold, right? Like the alchemical transmutation, all the old alchemists talk about turning lead into gold. And you got to break lead down into its prima materia, right? Like into almost like just pure potential, pure energy. And then it's allowed to be gold. But if you always view the lead as lead, it will never turn into gold, right? So we always view our body as broken. It will never manifest in vitality, right? In health, in energy, right? And so, yeah, that faith as a center point, right? This is where the miracles are allowed to occur. This stuff, it's spontaneous, I think back on my story a little bit, and just something that is a little bit more recent in my world. I worked as a therapist for a while. I did a master's in counseling psychology, opened up my practice. I went through that whole world, and I'm out of that world now, thank God. But in that transition, my daughter, my wife was pregnant with our daughter, and she was about 5 months along, and the public started complaining about BeyondTerrain, right, to the regulatory college. And, my livelihood was my practice, right? It was everything I invested, $100,000 in the business and schooling, etc. And it was all rooted in fear around, I won't be able to make enough money, what about the status and the ego and the business and the blah, 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 right? All these different things, all rooted in fear. And I thought that was my direction. I thought that was meant for me, but I was going against God's will in a way, because God had intended something far greater, right? A blessing, a miracle for me. And there was suffering because I believed that I was done a disservice. I believed that I was a victim. I believed in the fear narrative that I had told myself, right? That the college is like a parasite in my life and I'm merely a little victim of their system. But I was consenting to the entire process. And giving into all of the fear and believing in all of these fears is what disallowed me from receiving the miracle and the blessing. And so the moment I remember waking up one morning and deciding, like, okay, this is it. I'm not consenting not only to this college having agency over me, not only am I not consenting to these negative self-beliefs that I have about myself, not only am I done consenting to the fear. I made the pragmatic changes that I needed to do to get out of that field and relinquish my license. And it was in that week where sort of my own, like, BeyondTerrain took off, and, dollar-wise, it shifted almost instantaneously where I signed on with clients. I was then asked to speak at 3 events within that month of making that shift, right?
Wow.
I was well respected and received so well in the terrain world, whereas I'd have to work for years and years in therapy to gain any sort of respect, right? Because I was just, I was always diminished and belittled by my supervisors and colleagues, etc. And it was like, I thought that I needed this fear in my life. I thought that I needed this direction, that I was trying to like force this direction, this identity, and it was manifesting physically. It was manifesting as mental illness, and for lack of better terms, feelings of dysregulation, feelings of anxiety. But it was all based on my belief in the fear narrative rather than the faith, right? Because when I chose faith, I received the blessings, and it felt miraculous. It felt spontaneous and instantaneous. It was beautiful, and it all came from choosing faith. And it's not like I'm unwavering. I'm not some saint or anything like that. We can all choose this, but it's always about reorienting ourselves in every moment that we can, whether it comes to the symptoms that our body's expressing, right? Making peace with the symptoms is required first before the healing is allowed to occur, right? Like the peace doesn't come after. It's like, I remember hearing all my, people I used to get around with, and I'd be like, I want a wife, I want to have a family and whatever. And I'm like, okay, what are you doing to like, have that? Right? Like, they're like, oh, well, like, I'm going to become the best version of myself, like, once I find the right girl. right? It's like, oh, okay, you want to invest after you get the result, you know? Like
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
kind
yeah.
of the mentality that we have. It's like, oh, I'll be the right person after. Like, oh, I'll live my life and, you know, live out my passions after I feel good in my body, after I feel healthy. It's like, no, that's the starting point, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
like start living life as though you have all of these blessings and have faith that it's like an impossibility that you won't receive the highest good that you can conceive of, right? Because God wants to give us so much more than we even desire, but we have to choose faith. We have to choose good
Yeah.
and love, because the other, like fear and hatred, and that's all easier, right? It's
Yeah.
all more tempting.
Yeah. Man, okay, so for anyone listening, this is the first time Liev and I are talking, and the parallels in our journey is just spooky. Because the way that I got to writing online is my wife was pregnant with our first child, and I was at the end of my training. And unfortunately, the end of my training was when COVID happened. And I was at a hospital in New York City at the time. And, you know, I did what was expected of me. Maybe some might say more than was expected of me. And then at the end of the day, I was threatened with getting fired because I refused to get injected. And I said, after everything I did, you're going to do this? Okay. And my son was a week away or 2 weeks away from being born, something like that. And they're like, yeah, we're going to fire you unless you go do this thing right now. And I said, well, you know what? You can go fuck yourselves. Fire me. So I got fired in New York City, no income, barely any savings. And that was a hard time. And like, it was a lot of turmoil. And I don't want to say that I felt victimized, because if I felt that way, I don't think I would have had the resolve to go through with what I did. But I definitely felt like I was being abused and taken advantage of.
Sure.
And that generated a lot of resentment on my end. And so I thought, what's the best way for me to find an outlet? I'll start writing online. So I made a Twitter account, and then I started writing on Substack and stuff. But I'm so grateful that I made that decision to put my foot down and say, this is what I believe in, and all your threats and your propaganda is not going to have me waver from my beliefs. And then everything after that was just one after another of me having my beliefs tested. So for example, we had home birth, last 2 births. We have 3 kids now. I also have a daughter now. She's about 4 months old, which is wonderful.
Beautiful.
So we had a home birth, and people would ask me, you know, family and colleagues, and people would be like, well, look, I don't believe that God created a way of miracle that's inherently trying to harm us. So why would I be worried about this? I don't even understand what the worry's about at this point, because when I started seeing other animals give birth in nature, I was like, wait, why don't we just do this with humans? Why do we have to treat women like lab experiments in a sterile environment, in the most uncomfortable environment that they could possibly be in, for the most miraculous, and then like all of the trauma that comes with that separates them from a deep connection with their child. And then the same thing happened after the kids were born. We're like, are you sure you don't want to vaccinate your kids? I was like, I'm pretty sure. Like,
Yeah.
I got all the standard lines in my training and in my education, and I actually read, you know, the papers that were used to get these things approved. And I don't believe that this is of any value, so why would I? Because I'm afraid? I'm not afraid. I believe that, as you said, you put it very eloquently, like, we were all put here, and we are here we have been, whether you want to take this from a religious perspective or an evolutionary perspective, we're here, right? We're not going to be here if this environment and our existence was trying to kill us all the time. Like, we are adapted for this. So I believe that we're adapted for this, and that our body heals, and our body only wants to heal. You know, some people will ask me if they're really sick or something, or they're really old. They say, is it too late for me to do this thing to improve my health? And I'm like, no, because you're alive. Since you're alive, that means your body has the willing capacity to live, which is the same capacity to heal and to grow. So of course it's not too late for you. It's not too late for anyone as long as you're alive, if you believe that the body does the thing that it's supposed to do. So yeah, very spooky parallels, man.
I love it, man. Yeah, it sounds like we're on the same track. And I mean, listen, like, it is interesting, you know, God works in very mysterious ways, and when you ask for strength and peace, you're not necessarily given strength and peace, you're given situations of which you're allowed to be strong and peaceful.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And like, that's a, like, in talking with so many people now, like, I find that the gold is it's always in the moment, right? And like, when we face seemingly face hardship, right? Hardship, quote unquote, because that's just a perception. It's just a belief that it's actually hardship. It's a belief that it's negative. It's a belief that, it's a problem in the first place. But in these moments, whether or not we view something as hardship or not doesn't change anything at all, right? So like, I always choose, to the most empowering story. And what I realized is that when we believe disempowering stories, again, it kind of ends up manifesting as a self-fulfilling prophecy, but it's a lie.
Mm-hmm.
If something instills fear in you, it's a lie. If it instills disempowerment, it's also a lie. And how I like to explain this, because people will be like, oh, what about the innate fear that we all feel in nature, right? And I would argue that that's not something that is natural at all. Like when we encounter a snake in nature, I would argue that it's not a fear response that makes us back up and not go and cuddle with the snake, right? I don't think it's out of fear that we do that. I think you see a snake and you jump back. I think that's like just what we are. We call it fear. That's a perception. Because most people go to a thought process of, well, that snake could take a bite out of me, could be venomous, and then I could die. That's the fear. The fear is us getting in our own way, us believing in that as being, oh, that was a potential situation that we encounter, right? And then we can kind of see how this perpetuates further in the whole trauma narrative, which I have, some thoughts about. That now next time you walk down the path and all you're thinking about is potentially seeing a snake that could potentially bite you and potentially kill you, it's actually taking you out of the ever-present moment and creating suffering, because you're not having faith that in God's will, right? That if you encounter a snake, you will react perfectly. And part of this is the surrender that if the snake sees you first, there's really not much you can do, and that's God's will in a way, right? If a snake comes up from behind you and bites you in the leg, that's not like no matter the worry that you have, the preparation that you think you're doing in your head, none of it matters, right? And I would argue that the latter is more realistic to occur, right? Like the snake coming up and biting you from behind, or you missing the snake because you're all up in your mind and your thoughts, in your false beliefs in lies, right? You're actually more likely to not see the snake and react perfectly, right? So that story applies across the board, right? Like when we're worrying about things, we think that it's responsible to worry about potential things that could happen. But all of it takes us out of the ever-present moment and takes us away from our innate ability to react perfectly and do what we need to do. And that comes from even a sense of faith in our own ability to respond the correct way in if someone were to say something sideways to you, or if someone were to step to you, or if this were to happen, if that were to happen, right? Going back to the moment is always an ideal, right? And having faith. Now, again, there's a time and a place for everything. We all go through our journeys where we read a bunch of books and technically are not in the ever-present moment. We're thinking about a bunch of things. Thoughts are very useful tools. But the problem is that most of us get caught in overthinking, right? And depression and anxiety and all of these so-called mental illness are just, we need to just improve the relationship we have with our thoughts and view them as tools, view them as thoughts. And you don't have to believe every thought that comes to your head, right? Like it's not unnatural to think that if you encounter a snake to think, oh, it could bite me, right? But it's only when we believe that that's true that we create the suffering from that event, right? It's not unnatural or absurd to think about things that you encounter in your life or things that you have encountered. It's not pathogenic, to think about your past. But when we believe, it's belief in this, that it's persisting, that it's stuck in the body, that it's etc. Like that's when the suffering comes. That's when the pain comes. And ultimately, too, we have to come back to faith as the ultimate center point that did happen. It allowed for us to be who we are right now in this moment. And should something were to happen, I am better prepared now to deal and manage in the way that I must respond. And I have faith in my ability to do so. No amount of mental preparation is going to make that any easier or better. So maybe I'm off topic a little bit here, but
no. I think what you're circling around in the conversation about health and disease is that oftentimes what are signals That's feedback from our body or our mind or our wife or our kids or our parents.
Or the dog.
Or a dog, yeah, like, or a snake. You know, snakes read you too. Like all animals,
Yeah.
I feel like animals read us better than humans do because they're like this instinctually grounded entity. Like my dog can read people. When my dog is upset at a person that's walking by, she gets really like defensive and loud. I'm like, there's something probably off about that person. Or on the counter, you know, on the flip side, when she runs to someone and is like the sweetest thing you've ever seen, like, oh, okay, that's also an indicator. And the same thing with my kids. Like, I know that they know something. It's only me, an adult who's been educated and civilized, who's forgotten how to read the signals, how to receive the information, how to. And the same thing with what you're saying with the, you know, the example of when you want to embark on a new path in your life and God puts challenges in front of you, you might think, oh, he's punishing me. It's like, no, sharpening you. This is how you get sharp. This is not how you get. Why would he want to beat you down? He loves you, obviously. Why else would you be here with all of the things that you have abundant around you? So this whole, like, the signal, like you, and the fact that we have a whole ecosystem about health, which is changing these days, thankfully, because of the internet. But before this, I like to talk about this as like a hangover of the Industrial Revolution, because this whole ecosystem around health is about fearing, being concerned about, wanting to do something about, rather than leave the body alone whenever there's these symptoms, signs, lab abnormalities, whatever, temperature's a little elevated, you have to do something about it. It's like, no. You have to recognize it, you have to give it its place, and you have to trust that your body knows what it's doing. And so, again, I go back to like this fear as being this vector that's being used to actually make people sick en masse, when in reality, all they really need is a little bit of faith. And like, okay, you don't need to believe in God or a specific God. Believe in yourself, like believe in your body. Believe in the wisdom that exists. Like, when was the last time you remembered to breathe, but your body's doing it? When was the last time you knew how to heal a cut? Your body's doing it. Like, all these things your body does, and you still don't give it credit that it knows what it's doing.
Yeah, beautiful. So many ways to take it. I mean, I love this concept called the golden key. It's put forth by, was a priest or a Christian monk or something. And it's really well worth your time. His name is Emmett Fox. It's a very short audiobook. It's about 8 minutes. And the whole concept is that in times of stress, you know, in times of any hardship, all you need to do is think about the concept of God. And he says not to think about, you know, a personification, or even as a Christian, he doesn't say think of a figure, but think about the essence of what God represents, right? Interconnectedness, a oneness, a meaningfulness, right? And when we overwhelm ourselves with that, right, with what God represents, right? What is the essence of God? And we allow that to embody us. It's like one of the best ways to shift and transmute our being in the moment. You know, it's a very simple little practice that I like to use, right? Just coming back to the moment, to thinking of the essence of God, and just, you know, thank God, or whatever words, you know, resonate with you. Mm-hmm. That's where the faith comes from. That's why, like, all religious practices have little sayings like that, you know, just to reorient ourselves to this center point, right? Having faith in the body. That's like one of the primary things that I have to work with individuals, is unlearning the lies that we've been told about our body, about our so-called disease or our symptoms. And often just in new relation, right, better relationship with these things, these entities, these phenomenon, that's where a lot of this healing actually occurs, right? It's docere, it's doctor as teacher. And education isn't about learning more. Sometimes it's about unlearning nonsense.
Yes.
Right? So.
Yes. I'm glad you brought it back to that, because that's something that I wanted to touch on as well, because I like the idea of BeyondTerrain, and this is my interpretation, and you let me know what you think, because terrain is commonly referred in the landscape of like microbiology. There's the competing ideas of germ theory versus terrain theory. My personal opinion is that germ theory is actually a special case of terrain theory, but that's a side point. But what I like about BeyondTerrain is the realization that there's more than just the physical landscape that is terrain for microbiology to proliferate and differentiate. Every dimension that you exist in has a terrain. And one of the great things about this, because like you said, docere is to teach, you know? And I think that we can do more by empowering people than we can by prescribing things to them or telling them to get a supplement. And one of the best ways to empower someone is to say, hey, look, the problem's not inside you. The problem is in the terrain that you're inhabiting and how that interacts with you. So what is the most empowering thing you can tell someone? You can get better by just adjusting your terrain, by making changes to your environment. Whether it's a physical environment, it's your psychological environment, what you tell yourself, how you think about things, your relational environment, who you have relationships with, maybe they're not good for you. Your spiritual environment, maybe you're lost and you don't have like a guiding principle in your life. So that's why I like BeyondTerrain. Is first of all, it's beyond the culture dish that determines what bacteria grow and differentiate, but also it's empowering. Like, you can be healthy. Turn off those lights that are inside that are making you sick. Go outside, you know, get some sunlight. Expose yourself to the forest, to running water, fresh air, diversity of light and color and food. It's really empowering, and I don't know if that's what you meant by BeyondTerrain, but that's why I like it.
Yeah, I like it, man. Yeah, I find myself finding new interpretations all the time for what it truly means, but I think initially it was very much just surrounded around the idea that I don't want to put myself in a box. I don't want to put anyone in a box. I think that when we put ourselves in boxes like diagnostic labels or reductionistic tests or the test tube, you know, in the way we study science, looking down a microscope and not looking at the whole, all of this keeps us kind of stuck, and we're not allowed to fully become what we truly desire, right? And this is, again, comes back to the story of me believing that I was meant to be a therapist. That put me in a box, right? And I over-identified with that, and it wasn't until I shifted my perspective on my belief system around that my identity shifted. So it's everything, man. It's everything and beyond.
Yeah. So you did work as a therapist, and so one of the things that I've discovered as I left, and I don't mean left as in I no longer have a relationship with it, but I've kind of just stopped worrying about like academic, you know, medicine. I don't think it has much left to offer me. So I started focusing my attention on other stuff, and as I've done that, I've started to see even more flaws with what I was taught. So since you left, first of all, what were the problems that you saw before you left, and then what problems did you discover after you left?
One of the main problems that I saw when I was in the field was dependency on, you know, the mental health authorities in people's lives. I found that the way that
like
it was
your
structured,
therapist or the
yes,
infrastructure as in general? The therapist.
No, the therapist. Like, most often, you know, what I found in viewing how people set up their practice is you would eventually find enough people, like, you know, say 60, 70, maybe 80 people who will be your client for life, and then you're basically just full, and you're recycling, and you're seeing the same people, and you're talking about the same problems week after week after week, all kind of surrounding the same underlying issue, for lack of better terms, or stagnation, right? And what happens is that there are people in this world who are learning the same lesson over and over again out of, you know, fear in a way, out of, you know, maybe not wanting to accept a certain part of reality. And the therapeutic process, you know, I'm certainly a compassionate, empathetic guy myself, but there's also a time and a place to give someone a shake, you know, like, and be like, let's look at this, you know, you ever consider this, you know? But people do have to want to see that, right? So it just felt as though we were unable to, again, view things truly holistically as well. It was a bridle, it was a means of keeping everything more systematic, right? Like following along the line. And I had great mentors and I had a great supervisor when I was in practice. And because I did wilderness therapy, which was a really, really great modality because it left open the world, right? We were in the terrain, we were in nature doing this, and it was very ebb and flow, and it brought in sort of something bigger than both of us in the conversation. Four walls and doing, a step-by-step modality, it kind of just makes it, again, a one-size-fits-all approach. But I did have some great teachers and mentors in the field that taught me about attunement, and I think there are great therapists out there. It's just too, like, I'm not even gonna lie, like, hanging up my degree, it was like that, it's kind of a degree now that everyone just can go and get, like, there's, like, you just pay for it, you're gonna get through. Yeah. Like, you're not failing these. It's a really low effort degree, to be fully transparent.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit of a money grab. Anyways, I could go on, and I probably shouldn't say too much about that. But, the quality of what's being put out into the world is concerning in a way. But dependency is the biggest issue because there's also this concept of it's a big field of unhealed people working as authorities. Mm-hmm. And it's like you wouldn't go to a weight loss coach with someone who's like 500 pounds. It's like, why are we going to seek advice on depression and anxiety from people who are anxiety ridden and depressed and can't deal with their own dysregulations and stagnations, etc. And I mean, listen, again, I'm not saying I'm better than anyone or whatever, but it's just like you would want, someone who's certainly able to attune principles to their lives. So what came after actually is I discovered the work of, thanks to Kristen Friars, who's a phenomenal colleague of mine, discovered the work of George Pransky and Sydney Banks, who were both psychologists and left the field as well because they saw many inherent problems. And they taught about, the field of psychology through the three principles: mind, consciousness, and thought. And coming back to these principles of thought that I was discussing earlier, that thoughts are just thoughts and they're not reality, and in centering ourselves around that understanding, we start to get out of our own way quite a bit because even something like schizophrenia is still just a thought disorder, right? 99% of hallucinations or psychosis are all auditory, right? It's just a firm belief in our thought. And I love studying schizophrenia and psychosis. I love Theodore Lidz. That literature interests me so much. The Quakers and how they approached health was not in forceful remedies, but it was treating these individuals as brothers and sisters, as giving them purpose and meaning, and like better relationship, better coherence within the parts of themselves. And they saw tons of spontaneous remission. They didn't need the beatings and the lobotomies and things like that. So big realization afterwards was that to gain clarity on your journey and all of the traumas that you have faced, it does not require analysis. It does not require more in-depth analysis or, searching for maybe this is a potential trauma or that's a potential trauma. You end up just focusing on all of the perceived negative things in your life and viewing it as negative, right? Viewing it as, I'm the way I am because of all of these things that happen to me. These are all bad negative things because I now have this negative self-belief because of all those things, and it kind of reinforces itself, right? The way to find mental health and all health is to find it from within and learn an empowering narrative and unlearn the disempowering ones and shift our identity, shift our belief systems, right? Like this is where the truth lies in allowing health to manifest. It's not something you can force. You cannot force something into balance, right? You have to allow it to come out. So that's why the terrain concept and beyond the terrain concept, it's addressing the absolute root of this, which is within this world of what we believe, our identities, and that's ultimately what I found is that I've worked with some people where I don't even know what their problem is. We never talked about it. I just taught them the principles of natural law, of terrain, and the three principles I think is a great way to discuss the psychological world, faith, and through that, we don't even need to talk about the problems at all. And they're able to become the version of themselves that they kind of want to be, or the best version of themselves, or at least walk on that path towards their North Star without suffering, right? And that's the goal. It's like focusing on the problems. Maybe there's a time and a place to name it and see it for what it is, but at some point we have to move away from that story and just support our bodies, right? And empower ourselves like you're discussing.
Yeah, well, like now, as you're talking about this, I kind of had the thought that with the analyst, with the psychotherapist, you know, it's kind of like having a physician determine what your problem is and then give you a prescription, in the sense that you tell them your darkest hours and they interpret it for you and determine how they will help you, or reframe it for you so that you can stop being harmed by this thing. But that is some shaky ground, because like, who's going to be able to truly interpret your history for you? It can only be you. And so you need belief, you need strength, you need a framework that makes sense. Like, one of the frameworks I talk about a lot in my writing, not a lot, but it's gotten a lot of attention, is autoimmune disease. Like, the whole idea that your body's just killing itself randomly doesn't make any sense. Like, why would that happen? I'm not saying there are no such instances of autoimmune disease, but I'm saying that probably the vast majority of something that's diagnosed as autoimmune is probably nothing like what people tell you it is. And that's not only like disempowering, it's also, it leaves you in this like cycle of like, oh, you're just always going to be sick and there's nothing you're going to do, and that sickness is just going to propagate and amplify over time, and all we can do is help destroy your immune system in the process. And so, yeah, like, I now see that as I don't want to demonize all, you know, therapists. I'm sure there's good therapists out there like yourself, but the idea that someone anymore. Okay, fair enough.
Just to be clear.
Okay. You're a guide, right? Is that what you think of yourself as?
Yeah, I don't know. Label.
Yeah, that's what I think of myself as. I think of myself as a guide. I'm not really like an advisor. I'm not someone's doctor. I'm not a physician. I'm just here to show people ways that they can think about themselves, and maybe they'll make themselves better. I don't have to, you know, some of the best doctors I've heard of and have seen, they just listen, and then the patient talks and fixes themselves.
Truly.
Which is
great. I kind of view it more as like a partnership, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, like, I think there's a time and a place for seeking counsel with like elders and mentors, and I've had really, really positive relationships with people that I respect and look up to. But it's never, it's like how we engage in it, right? This is our autonomy piece, right? It's like how we engage with a practitioner. Like, I still like going to practitioners, like get, you know, acupuncture, osteopathy, or different things like that, but it's how we engage, our relationship with it, our relationship with the medicine might be more important than the medicine itself.
Yes.
Might be more important than the mentorship itself, right? It's how we relate to it. If we think this person's going to fix me, or this medicine's going to fix me as a magic bullet, we run into the same allopathic trouble, no matter what you do. Like, I have talked to people who have done everything under the sun. Every natural healing practice that you and I could both recommend, they've done it. And they're still in the same situation because of the view is that it was all meant to heal. And if it didn't heal, now there's this pattern of, well, I must really be broken because nothing worked, right? And it just reinforced that narrative, because it was, they never had that narrative shift, that belief system shift, right? So it's these moments of deep understanding, of epiphany in a way, right? And I remember George Pransky actually mentioning this study where they studied the course of therapy, and people would do like hours of therapy, like 50 hours of therapy, and they would ask these people, it was like a qualitative study, they would ask them, when did you receive all the benefit from the therapeutic process? When did you actually, you know, gain something from it? Was it at the end? Was it at the start? Was it like slowly throughout? Overwhelmingly, they reported that there were 2 or 3 moments of about 5 seconds each within the entire course of therapy occurred, right? It was about 15 seconds max that all of the benefit come from, right? It's moments of deep understanding, of epiphany. If they were lucky enough to have it fostered, revelation, right? And this clarity comes, it can come from counsel, it can come from sitting next to a stream. I've had plenty of epiphany that way.
Yeah.
I've had epiphany talking with a, you know, janitor, you know, like,
yes,
it's the respect that you carry for people and how you view your life as medicine. Like, it's so amazing. I got chills right now, but like, the best practitioner relationships I ever received were with people who had no business, quote unquote, being a practitioner, right? And it wasn't that role at all. It was literally strangers that you meet, and they give you exactly what you need, right? You have to orient yourself and your intention to be open to this, and that's how we start to receive.
Yeah. This is one of the things I don't like about the practitioner ecosystem in general, is that they think that they're, not all of them, but a lot of them, think that they're the only ones that have the right to have some sort of, transformative relationship with someone. Like you said, it could be some person that you just met on the street. Like, I've interacted with people that I just met, not in a therapeutic relationship, just like in an event. And they're talking about their life, and I'm listening, and I say one thing because it resonates with me somehow, and they're like, their mind is like, oh my God, I've been doing things wrong the whole time. And I'm like, wow, that's amazing that you came to that realization. That's wonderful. I'm so glad to have been a part of this conversation. Like, it's incredible. And the other thing that I think fortifies what you're saying about Pransky and his result is that, this experiments that people like to cite about quitting habits or getting out of PTSD with, like psychedelics and drugs like that, these things happen once. It's one moment in time, and it's so robust and lasts for probably the rest of their life, unless some other event occurs that puts them into another kind of turmoil. But at the very least, they get a glimpse, and they're like, well, life doesn't have to be this way, and maybe I was looking at it all wrong. And I know there's going to be people that are going to be like, oh, this is just wishy-washy, psychobabble, whatever. But I mean, if you think that your spirit and your psyche have no bearing on your health, then the concept of suicide is something I'd like to introduce to you. This is a broken spirit, and it leads to death immediately. There's no way you're going to keep that thing alive unless you want to restrain it with jackets or pills. How are you going to keep them alive? They're broken, and they want to kill them, like they want to end their lives. So a broken spirit, diseased psyche, incoherence across all these dimensions, I want to ask you something, because I've had this experience now as well, where people will come to me with problems that they've had. They went to their doctor, and I give them a few recommendations. I'm like, these are things that I would do. I'm not prescribing anything. Go try these things. And they come back to me with like the most incredible transformation they've had. And sometimes my mind is blown. I'm like, I can't believe how potent this stuff is. Like I had this close friend of ours, family friend, he had a problem in his neck. Doctors are giving him pain meds and like physio, and now they're saying, oh, you're going to need surgery at some point. There's nothing we can do. I gave him a couple of recommendations, how to adjust his life. And then just yesterday, I sent him a text. I said, hey, how are you feeling? It's been a couple of weeks, since we talked. I said, how are you feeling? He's like, my neck feels as good as it ever has. I was like, what? That quickly? And no one told you any. So like, from your perspective, what is the most unexpected and amazing transformation you've seen someone based on the way that you practice now?
Wow. Dude, my mind is blown constantly in this line of work, man. And I find like, the more excited I am, and I think like if there are other practitioners listening, it's like you are a mirror to others as well. And right, like our excitement reflects in people, right? So like I've had conversations with people where I've just been like overwhelmingly excited, where we just do a discovery call, and it's like 2 weeks later after a discovery call, I'm like, hey, how's everything going? And they're like, oh my God, it feels like, my life is completely turned around. It's like, we talk for like 30 minutes, you know what I mean? Like, it's moments like this, like, and again, like, it's not always in, I could launch into tons of different client stories, and it's always a very individual process and how these things kind of resolve themselves. But it's like, again, like I'm not a saint or anything, and when I work with people, I aim to empower them to have this effect as well. It's like in every conversation you have on the street, right? Like you can foster this sense of miracle in people, Yeah, I mean, I've had some pretty interesting ones. I like this story because I have one client who, like, on paper ate like everything right, tracked the micronutrient of every food, like perfect circadian rhythm. It's like bang, bang, bang. Everything was perfect, right? And I remember being like, okay, like, let's make one change. I want you to eat one meal a week, where it's just pure love. You prepare it because it's nostalgic. It's like an ancestral food for your heritage. You grew up eating it, and that's the only change we're going to make. Objectively, started consuming less nutrients, and the gut issues and the brain fog and the skin rashes all went away. Again, almost instantly after just making that shift in relationship to food, right? So like still ate whole nourishing foods and opt for organic and do what you can and get to know your farmer. But like it's those little small shifts in relationship, like I gotta eat out of like with love as well and gratitude. It's more than just like that has effect on the physical food.
Oh, yeah.
And objectively on paper, eating less nutrients.
Yeah.
Because then they started doing it a couple times a week where they just eat and laugh and, have a good time and kind of like became less strict in a way, right? And that's what fostered the change, right? I mean, you could go read about it, like people spontaneous remission from autoimmune, from the big C word, from any illness. You can find it. Some people have near-death experiences and come out of it with no illness. There's a really cool study on surgery where they did placebo surgeries on people, like people with back pain and knee pain and stuff like that.
They call it sham surgery. Yeah.
Sham surgeries, and the results were just as good, Like, it's like unbelievable stuff, So like, go to someone, like if you're gonna work with someone or seek counsel, it's like someone that resonates. Again, it's your relationship that matters. Like it's these deeper themes that matters, because across the board, in this alternative health space, there are tons of people who are doing like fine work, as long as we're first do no harm, which is principle of natural healing.
Yes.
But people go and work with people. Some people get results, some people don't. So like that resonance piece is huge, right? Like the nocebo we were talking about earlier. If you really have disbelief in a modality, it's like you may as well not even try it.
Exactly.
Like go and do something that resonates with you.
Yes. Yeah, that's an important element of it. That's one of the things that I'm now incorporating into my model is like, you can't recommend a modality just because you believe in it. If the patient's not ready for it, then they won't receive the benefits. And if anything, it could cause them harm. So don't go experimenting with things until you're sure or you've prepared the person to receive it. Like they have to be ready to receive it. If they're not ready, it's no good. Yeah, amazing. All right, fantastic. Look, I really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm sure we'll have many more as time goes on. It was a pleasure to meet you, Liev. Do you want to let people know where they can find you, or if there's anything else you want to talk about? I'm all game.
Yeah, everything is BeyondTerrain. You got YouTube. Videos are great over there. There is an old podcast, BeyondTerrain podcast, that I'm taking a little hiatus from, but that's full of gold. Instagram, and on my website you can find how I have different tiers of working with people based on what resonates with you. If you want to do one-to-one, I offer that. If you want to do a group, if you want to just asynchronous sort of coursework, I do have the Academy, which is kind of by donation, so you can go and join that, and there's tons of gold in there and great community of people that are all walking sort of along the same line, and we walk together, and I would also recommend attending events. I've been doing a lot of events recently, and they are extremely powerful and transformative just to be around individuals, like-minded individuals. So like Confluence with my good friend Alex Zek was an absolute blast. It was one of the best moments aside from, my daughter and marrying my wife. And
of course,
it was a really beautiful, beautiful time to be around these people and to listen to this stuff. So, like engaging with life, living life, that's what it's all about. Like some of my work involves like doing the opposite of what the alternative health world says. It's kind of funny.
Yeah.
Taking people out, it's like, let's try healing less, and that actually leads to us being healed. And it's the craziest thing, right? So
absolutely, yeah.
It's really cool. I got tons of stuff out there for y'all, so go check it out.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining me, man. We appreciate it.
Of course, thank you. Appreciate you.